They called it a detention facility, not a prison, a clean bureaucratic phrase. But behind the fences of Guantanamo Bay, where the Caribbean sun burned through razor wire, something darker grew, an idea that justice could be suspended, that fear could justify anything. The first men arrived blindfolded and shackled, their names erased. Some were captured on battlefields, others were sold for a bounty. They were all told the same thing. You are the enemy, and when you're the enemy there are no rules. They were flown in on cargo planes, chained to the floor, wearing the orange suits that would soon become global symbols. When they landed, the heat hit them like a wall. Dogs barked, guards shouted. The world's most powerful democracy was building a camp that existed outside its own laws. At first, America told itself this was temporary. It was a time of terror, smoke still rising from the ruins of September 11th. The people wanted safety, revenge, answers. Politicians gave them a story. We will find the monsters, bring them here, and show the world that freedom fights back. But freedom, when it's twisted by fear, can forget its own reflection. They called it Camp X-Ray, rows of chain-link cages under a white sun. Prisoners slept on concrete, praying toward a sky that couldn't hear them. The guards, young men and women from Ohio, Texas, Kentucky, barely 20, were sent to guard ghosts whose names they couldn't pronounce. They were told these men hated freedom, hated America. So they learned to stop looking them in the eyes. Time lost all meaning there. Days melted into heat, interrogations, and the metallic taste of silence. Some men talked, some screamed, some just stared, refusing to break. For them, Guantanamo wasn't a place, it was an experiment. How long can a person remain human when the world decides they are not? No charges, no trials, no lawyers, just indefinite detention. It sounded clinical, reasonable, but it meant forever. Years later, a guard would remember a detainee whispering, "Tell my mother I'm alive." The guard didn't know his name or his crime. He just nodded. That night he couldn't sleep. There were hunger strikes. Men refused to eat to protest the silence that was swallowing them. In response, doctors were ordered to force feed them, not with compassion, but with tubes pushed through their noses and taped to their throats. The body became another battlefield. Healers became instruments of policy. Meanwhile, outside the fences, life moved on. Presidents came and went. Lawyers argued on TV. The public, weary of wars, stopped asking questions. The orange suits became old news, but the camp didn't disappear. It adapted, survived. Like a scar that refuses to fade, Guantanamo became a symbol and a secret, proof that ideals can bend and still claim to be unbroken. Some men were released after years, with no charges and no apology. They walked free into countries that no longer wanted them, carrying nothing but the weight of lost time. One said, "They took my body, but they couldn't take my dreams." Another said nothing at all. For the guards too, the place never truly left. They came home different. They found it hard to explain what it meant to serve there, to be both protector and witness, to follow orders that made your stomach twist. Some drank too much, some avoided mirrors. A few spoke out, saying, "We built something we didn't understand." Inside the cells, stories continued to live, stories the world refused to hear. One man taught himself English by tracing letters on the concrete floor. Another carved poetry into a styrofoam cup. They wrote of birds they couldn't see and oceans they couldn't touch. Even caged, the human voice finds a way to speak. Then documents began to surface, interrogation logs, memos authorizing enhanced techniques. The world learned of waterboarding, stress positions, sleep deprivation, methods that were never supposed to define a free nation. But by then the damage was done. The lines between right and wrong had blurred. Some still argued that Guantanamo saved lives, that it prevented attacks. Maybe they needed to believe it, because to admit otherwise meant facing a darker truth, that the cage was built not just for them, but for us, to contain our fear, our rage, our need to feel safe no matter the cost. As the years passed, the world changed. Wars ended, enemies shifted. But Guantanamo remained, suspended in a strange, eternal present, a place America couldn't defend and couldn't destroy. Presidents promised to close it, Each one failed. Because Guantanamo was never just a place, it was an idea that some people are beyond rights, beyond law, beyond redemption. And once that idea is born, it's hard to kill. A lawyer once called it the legal black hole of our time. But for those who lived it, it was the smell of salt air mixed with sweat, the sound of chains at dawn, the ache in your chest when you realize you've been forgotten. Some detainees turned to faith, some lost it entirely. One said, "At first I prayed to be free, then I prayed to forget. Now I pray to be remembered." Even the guards carry ghosts. One returned years later to see what remained. The cages were empty, the paint peeled. He whispered, "This place never ended. It just moved inside us." In classrooms, Guantanamo is now a case study. Students debate if it was necessary, if the ends justified the means. But the truth isn't found in arguments. It lives in the quiet spaces between words, in the eyes of the men who waited, and in the silence of those who looked away. Justice, once suspended, doesn't just resume. It limps back, haunted by what was done in its name. The story of Guantanamo isn't about villains or heroes. It's about choices, the kind that nations make when they are afraid, the kind that reveal not who we fight, but who we are. The real tragedy might be that in trying to defend freedom, we created a place where freedom itself was denied. The ocean around the bay is still beautiful. Tourists on boats see only the coastline, not the years, not the screams, not the silence. But if you listen closely, you might hear the whisper of a story that refuses to die, the echo of names that justice forgot. Guantanamo wasn't built in a day. It was built from every time we said just this once, just for safety, just until it's over. And those words, repeated enough, can build a wall higher than any fence, a wall between what we believe and what we become. Now, decades later, the camp still stands, half empty, half forgotten. The world has moved on, but the questions remain. Can a nation heal without facing its own shadow? And when we say, never again, do we mean it? The men who once lived there are scattered across the earth. Some have built new lives. Some live in silence. But every so often, one of them writes a poem, or speaks in a documentary, or simply breathes in the open air and says, "I survived." Perhaps that is the final truth of Guantanamo, that even when systems fail and justice is silenced, the human will endures. It remembers, it resists. And in that small act of remembering, the world has a chance to begin again. The cage remains not as metal and wire, but as a memory, a mirror held up to a nation that once believed it could separate fear from freedom. And in that reflection, we see ourselves. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. Subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world.